Welcome to the deep dive. You ever find yourself thinking back to those killer PlayStation 3 games? Like The Last of Us, God of War 3, maybe Uncharted 2. Now imagine playing those classics again, not on some old console collecting dust, but like right on your Android phone.
Sounds a bit like science fiction, doesn't it?
It really does. But believe it or not, PS3 emulators have actually started appearing on Android. It's not just about getting a nostalgia fix either.
No, it's really about pushing the limits, seeing what these little supercomputers in our pockets can actually handle.
Exactly. And when you talk about running software from one system on a totally different one, you always hear these two words thrown around: emulation and virtualization.
Right, and people mix them up all the time, but they're really distinct technologies, different tools for different jobs.
Totally.
And look, while both of them let you do more with computers trying to get something as, well, notoriously tricky as the PS3 running on a phone, that whole effort really shines a light on this crossroads of insane tech ambition
Huge legal headaches.
and some very passionate, sometimes very heated community arguments. It's quite the saga.
And that saga is exactly what we want to unpack today. So our mission for this deep dive.
Yeah.
First, let's just clear the air on emulation versus virtualization. Get the basics straight.
Good idea.
Then we'll jump headfirst into the controversial, but let's be honest, pretty exciting world of PS3 emulation on Android. We'll look at the promises, the massive challenges, and the tricky legal stuff surrounding it all. Ready to jump in?
Let's do it.
Okay, so first up, emulation. What are we actually talking about here?
At its heart, emulation is basically one computer system pretending to be another. It mimics the functions of that original system.
Right, like an interpreter, a
Yeah.
piece of software that tricks the new system.
Exactly. It's a software layer that makes software designed for System A. I think it's running on System A, even though it's actually on System B.
And you probably bump into this more than you realize, right? Like, maybe you have an old scanner,
Oh yeah, classic example. Your new Windows or Mac doesn't talk to it anymore.
but you find some third-party software, maybe with an emulator built in, and suddenly your modern PC can make that old scanner work again.
It makes the PC speak scanner, essentially.
Or the big one for a lot of us, game console emulation. Playing old Nintendo games or Sega games or whatever on your PC.
Or even on your phone now, increasingly. It's also used in business, things like Citrix running old legacy apps alongside new stuff.
So the main point is it unlocks stuff that would otherwise just be gone, unavailable.
Precisely. It preserves access. Now, virtualization, that's coming at things from a whole different angle.
Right. This is more the cloud computing backbone, isn't it?
Absolutely foundational. Virtualization uses software to create this abstraction layer over the hardware resources. The main goal isn't mimicking, it's partitioning and sharing those resources effectively.
Okay, so like virtual machines, VMs.
That's the most common example, yeah. VMs are virtual copies of physical hardware. You can run multiple operating systems totally isolated from each other on just one physical machine.
So unlike emulation, there pretends to be the hardware.
Virtualization carves up the real hardware. It partitions it into these separate, isolated boxes. Each VM thinks it has its own machine, but they're all sharing the underlying physical resources, managed by something called a hypervisor.
And that's why it's so efficient for things like servers and the cloud.
Exactly. It optimizes how you use the hardware. Think about virtual desktops for people working remotely, or how cloud providers manage huge data centers, or even just testing different operating systems on your own computer without needing separate machines. It's all about efficiency and scalability.
Okay, so let's nail down the key differences then. Operation, performance uses.
Right. Operation. Emulation mimics or translates for the hardware. Virtualization partitions the physical hardware.
Performance. Emulation can be slower, right? Because
Yeah.
of that translation work.
Generally, yeah, there's overhead. Virtualization is usually much more efficient, especially for servers, testing, cloud stuff, because it's accessing the hardware more directly, just in divided chunks.
And use cases. Emulation is for running software on totally different hardware types. Console games on PC, old apps on new OS.
While virtualization is geared towards optimizing resources, running multiple OSs side by side, testing, and, the entire cloud infrastructure, SaaS, PaaS, IaaS, all that relies heavily on virtualization.
So both expand what computers can do, but in very different ways for different problems.
You got it.
Okay, but now, let's apply this to the beast, the PlayStation 3. Here's where it gets really interesting, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Why? Why has the PS3 been this Mount Everest of emulation? especially trying to get it onto a phone.
It really boils down to one thing. That incredibly unique and, let's just say, complex cell broadband engine architecture.
Not your average CPU.
Not even close. It wasn't a single chip doing all the work. It was designed more like a cluster. You had one main core, the power processing element, the PPE,
Okay.
and then 8 of these helper cores, the synergistic processing elements, or SPEs. Well, 7 usable ones usually. Think of it like a 7-core processor, but way weirder.
Weirder how?
It was super CPU heavy, and critically, it needed constant, high-speed, really tightly synchronized communication between all those cores to shuffle data around.
Ah.
For certain tasks back then, like heavy parallel processing or physics stuff, it was powerful, but it's an absolute nightmare to emulate on modern hardware.
Because our current CPUs work differently.
Completely differently. Modern CPUs are designed to minimize the chit-chat between cores for efficiency. The cell was all about the chit-chat. That constant data juggling becomes a massive bottleneck even for really beefy desktop CPUs today.
So trying to do that on a mobile chip.
Yeah, mobile chips they just can't keep up with that kind of an intense, synchronized core communication. They choke on it.
So even powerful devices struggle. Like, I've heard the Steam Deck can run some PS3 stuff, but not perfectly.
Exactly. Even something relatively powerful and actively cooled like the Steam Deck shows the strain. It can run some games, maybe decently, but perfect compatibility across the board. Nope. Still a huge challenge.
And for phones, it's even worse then.
Oh, much worse. You've got the basic hardware limitations. Mobile CPUs just don't have the same raw power. Then there's heat and battery. Phones are thin. They aren't designed for the kind of sustained load PS3 emulation demands. They get hot fast, battery drains like crazy.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And storage. PS3 games are huge, right? We're talking many gigabytes per game. A lot of phones now don't even have SD card slots. Where are you going to put all that data?
Right. So it's a triple whammy. Power, heat, storage.
Pretty much. That's why you see these dedicated Android handhelds like the Retroid Pocket or the AYN Odin having a bit more success.
Because they're built for it.
Yeah, they're chunkier, they have better cooling, bigger batteries. They're designed with emulation in mind, unlike your average smartphone that needs to be super thin and light.
So what's the timeline look like? Is this even feasible on phones down the road?
Well, opinions are divided. Some optimistic folks in the emulation scene think maybe, 3 to 10 years we might see some decent PS3 emulation on high-end Android phones.
But others are skeptical.
Very skeptical. Many doubt we'll ever get full-speed, reliable performance on typical smartphones because the cell architecture is just so fundamentally different from how mobile chips work. And it's worth pointing out, even Xbox 360 emulation, which should theoretically be easier, isn't really a thing on Android yet either.
Wow. Okay, so given all of that, it's kind of amazing we're even having this conversation, but recently something did happen. This app, aPS3e, showed up on the Google Play Store.
Yeah, that definitely made waves.
Yeah.
aPS3e, it's pitched as a native PS3 emulator for Android, came from an unknown Chinese developer using the name Anu.
It's based on existing code.
Apparently, yes. It uses source code from RPCS3, which is the big established PS3 emulator for PCs, and also borrows code from Vita3K, a PS Vita emulator, and Termux, a terminal emulator for Android. So it's building on the work of others.
Okay, let's talk about the good parts first. What's surprising about it?
Well, first off, it's free on the Play Store and no ads. That's pretty unusual for these kinds of apps.
There's a paid version, too.
Yeah, a $5 premium version, but it's explicitly positioned as just a way to support the dev, doesn't actually unlock features, which is interesting.
And it claims to be open source now.
That's the claim, yeah. The code is up on GitHub. It handles different game formats like ISO and PKG files. And a big plus, you can point it to a folder with all your games instead of adding them one by one.
What about settings? Can you tweak things?
Quite a bit, actually. You can choose Vulkan graphics drivers, which are usually recommended for better performance. You can mess with CPU settings like the PPU decoder and threads. You can scale the resolution down, like way down to 480p for demanding games, just to try and get playable speed.
480p, wow. Takes you back.
Doesn't it? It also has VSync to stop screen tearing, a stretch mode for full screen, and thankfully a reset to default button if you tinker too much and break things.
Okay, so some decent features. But there's always a but, isn't there? Let's talk about the problems and the controversy.
Right. Well, first, those performance requirements we mentioned, they are steep, seriously high-end.
Like, what are we talking minimum?
The app suggests a bare minimum of 6 gigs of RAM, but really recommends 8 gigs. Needs Android 7 Plus DAO, though the Play Store says 9 Plus DAO. And the big one, You basically need a top-tier recent processor, something like the Snapdragon 8 Gen 1 Plus or newer.
So your average phone from a few years ago, probably not going to cut it.
Highly unlikely. We're talking flagship devices like a Galaxy S25 Ultra, maybe an Asus ROG Phone 9. So yeah, revisiting PS3 classics on your 5-year-old Android, probably not happening with this app.
And even on those powerful phones, is it smooth sailing?
Apparently not. Users on places like Reddit are reporting really slow loading times, lots of bugs, stuttering, especially with bigger, more complex games. It sounds like only a small number of games even launch properly, and some people aren't getting any sound.
Okay, so performance is shaky. What about the other issues? The licensing stuff.
Ah, yes. That got messy. Initially, the developer released aPS3e as completely closed source.
Even though it used code from open source projects like RPCS3.
Exactly, which is a big no-no in the open source world. Then things got weirder. They asked for donations, set a $2,000 goal, and said they'd release the source code if they hit the goal.
Oof, that probably didn't go over well.
Not at all. It rubbed many emulation fans the wrong way, as one source put it. It felt like holding the code hostage, code that was partly built on the community's own work.
But they did release the code eventually.
They did. It's on GitHub now, and they claim it's open source. But some observers point out it's still not quite following best practices. Like, there isn't a main license file in the root directory, although the GPLD2 license is apparently included within the RPCS3 code folder that's part of the project.
So still a bit murky.
Okay.
And this led to community skepticism.
Definitely. People immediately drew parallels to other controversial emulators like Daemon PS2, which famously got caught using stolen code from the legitimate PCSX2 emulator. So there's this lingering distrust around aPS3e because of how it started.
This really does raise that bigger question, doesn't it? All this talk about code, licenses, sources. Where is the legal line with emulation? Is it even legal?
Okay, so the core legal principle, generally speaking, is that emulators themselves are not illegal. Creating software that mimics hardware functionality, that's usually okay.
So the software itself is fine. Where's the problem then?
The problem usually comes down to copyright law and how you get the games. Specifically, the potential for playing pirated games. Sharing or downloading game files, ROMs, ISOs that you don't own, that's almost always illegal.
Even if you own the original game, can you make a backup?
That's a gray area.
Yeah.
Some argue it might be legal under very specific, limited circumstances for personal backup, but distributing those backups, definitely illegal. The main legal risk isn't typically the emulator, it's the game files.
How do developers even make emulators without getting into trouble? Don't they need to copy stuff?
That's where fair use and reverse engineering come in. To make an emulator work, devs often have to reverse engineer the console's BIOS, basically. Take it apart digitally to see how it works.
Is that allowed?
Sometimes.
Yeah.
U.S. copyright law has this fair use doctrine. It allows limited copying for things like criticism, teaching, research. And importantly, courts have sometimes ruled that reverse engineering for interoperability making systems work together can qualify as fair use, especially if you create something transformative that doesn't just replace the original product in the market.
And there's the DMCA too, right? The Digital Millennium Copyright Act.
Right. The DMCA has rules against breaking digital locks, like encryption on game disks. That's the anti-circumvention part. But it also has exemptions which get reviewed every few years, specifically allowing circumvention for things like preserving old software or, again, achieving interoperability. So it's complicated.
But despite these potential legal allowances, companies still go after emulators.
Oh, absolutely. Gaming companies, and particularly Nintendo, have a history of aggressively suing emulator developers and sites that distribute ROMs.
Why? If the emulator isn't strictly illegal.
They argue that emulators enable and facilitate widespread piracy, which hurts their sales. These lawsuits often end in settlements where the developers have to shut down and sometimes pay hefty sums. It definitely creates a chilling effect.
So it's a legal minefield. What are the established emulator projects saying about things like aPS3e?
Well, RPCS3, the main desktop PS3 emulator whose code aPS3e is based on, they've put out official warnings.
What do they say?
They specifically warn people about fraudulent emulators claiming to run PS3 games on mobile devices. They state very clearly, there is no official native version of RPCS3 for Android or iOS, and they have no plans to make one.
Why not? Just the technical challenge.
Primarily, yes. They emphasize the technical limitations that currently prevent effective PS3 emulation on mobile devices. Basically what we were just talking about with the cell processor and mobile chip limits.
Do they warn about safety risks too?
They do. They explicitly mention the potential risks, like malware or data theft, that can come from installing fake or unofficial emulators. Their advice is basically be careful, stick to official sources, verify what you're downloading.
Okay, solid advice. So let's pull all this together. What does this mean for you, the listener, right now, if you're curious about PS3 on your phone?
Well, connecting the dots,
Yeah.
the reality is, even with aPS3e showing up, PS3 emulation on Android is still very, very demanding. It's buggy, it's in the super early stages. That unique cell architecture is just a massive hurdle for phones.
So the practical takeaway is, for the average person with an average phone, playing PS3 games smoothly isn't really here yet. It's more like a glimpse of a possible future.
A very glitchy, demanding glimpse, yeah.
Yeah.
You need bleeding-edge hardware, patience for tinkering, and you have to accept that most games probably won't work well, if at all. It's not a simple download-and-play situation.
And critically, remember the legal side.
Absolutely. Even if an emulator like aPS3 itself navigates the legal gray areas where you get your game files, the ROMs or ISOs, is the biggest legal and ethical issue. You really need to stick to legitimate copies if you decide to explore this, both for legal reasons and for your own device security.
This whole journey, trying to get PS3 running on phones, it really does show that constant tension in tech, doesn't it?
Totally. It's this push and pull between wanting to preserve gaming history, wanting to innovate and push hardware limits, but also needing to protect companies' rights and figuring out how to make content accessible safely and legally.
Fascinating stuff. So, looking ahead, what's the final thought here? Will our regular phones eventually conquer the cell processor? Or are these dedicated, beefier Android handhelds going to be the main place for serious mobile emulation for the long haul?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's hard to say for sure. Maybe mobile chip tech will have some unforeseen breakthrough, or maybe the cell will remain this unique challenge best tackled by more specialized hardware.
The quest continues, pushing the boundaries of what fits in your pocket. Always.
Well, that brings us to the end of this deep dive. Thank you so much for joining us as we explored the tangled world of emulation, virtualization, and the wild attempt to bring PS3 gaming to mobile. If you found this discussion as interesting as we did, please do consider subscribing to the channel, give us a like if you enjoyed it, and definitely hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next analysis. Until next time, keep digging into what makes you curious, and we'll see you for the next deep dive.